Well, good evening and welcome. My name is Carl Smallwood. I'm the co-director of the Divided Community Project at the Moritz College of Law. And we help communities and their leaders plan and transform insights we've learned into guidelines and tools local public officials and community leaders can immediately use to address community conflict and unrest. Conflict from political, racial, religious, and other differences that divide communities. I want to thank the Ohio State University and President Christina Johnson for hosting this Education for Citizenship Post-Election Dialogue series. The first series event, Unpacking the 2020 Election, How We Got Here and What Lies Ahead, was last Thursday and featured OSU experts in election law and presidential power. It's now available online at the link in the chat function, and Bill will drop a link there in just a second. Tonight's program, Unpacking the 2020 Election, Can We Talk?, is an interactive session with experts from across the Ohio State University community. The leaders of this conversation will be the Divided Community Project's Deputy Director, Bill Froelich, who you just heard from, and two of our wonderful research assistants, Julia Sivertson, a second-year law student from Columbus, and Salvia Jannat, a Master of Laws student from Bangladesh. Julia and Salvia, it's to you.
Thanks, Carl. The last week in politics has been a roller coaster ride for most of us on this call. This evening's event will focus on positive and productive ways to discuss the issues that divide us. We know that many of you have a friend, roommate, family member, maybe multiple family members, classmate, or colleague who voted differently than you. We hope you can leave tonight's conversation with ideas to engage in positive, productive discussions. So tonight's event will take place in 3 stages. First, 9 diverse leaders from across the OSU community will share short bits of advice for engaging in difficult post-election conversations. Right now, we're dropping a short card into the chat function to help with difficult post-election conversations. We will reference this card all evening long, so please click on that and open that up on the side. Second, in about 30 minutes, we will break up into small groups to discuss the challenges and opportunities of difficult conversations in a more intimate environment. Facilitators assigned to each group will try to address some of the questions you identified when you registered. Finally, Bill will lead a 20-minute conversation with the full group, discussing themes and challenges that arose in the small group conversations.
All right, thank you, Julia. Let's quickly identify a couple of ground rules for today's conversation. We anticipate recording this Zoom session, but we will not record your breakout rooms. And during this first part of the conversation, please stay on mute. We encourage you to take notes about the ideas presented. And in fact, we would like you to write down 2 ideas that resonate with you, which you will commit to testing the next time you are involved in a difficult conversation. Julia, are you ready to get started?
Yep, ready to go.
Okay, so let me introduce our first 3 speakers and their topics. First, we will hear from Professor Camille Quinn from the College of Social Work. She'll share her thoughts on how to anticipate talking with people with whom you disagree. Then Professor Michael Neblo from Political Science will discuss why you might ask questions with the goal of understanding. And third, Dean Kate Hallihan from the Glenn College will share why you might distance yourself if your self-esteem is challenged. Professor Quinn.
Thank you. So in having these conversations with people you disagree with, first you need to recognize, we all do, that value exists in talking with people you disagree with. It helps you evolve your perspective, gives you a different thought process. It also helps you to strengthen your argument. So there may be spaces where you could strengthen your position or what it is you have to say. You may also learn something new. So remember that information is power. There are costs also to not having these discussions. Some say you should disagree with grace, and I would offer that we should disagree with style and class. How might we do that? Some tips I'm going to share from Megan Phelps Roper's TED Talk about talking to people you disagree with. First, you want to assume good and positive intent in others, or at least be neutral. I strive to be neutral. I can then get to positivity. You want to also ask, can I ask you about what it was you just shared or said? Especially if I've been triggered or activated, asking if I can ask about it opens the door to more dialogue. Again, stay classy or neutral, channel power and positivity, make your case, tell your story. It may be more powerful to talk about your story versus statistics or facts. Let the other person speak and listen to them while they're speaking. Don't try to think about what you're going to say, just listen, and then hear points where you agree. And in doing that, you can recap and focus on those areas of agreement. I'm now going to turn it over to Michael.
Thank you. So I've been asked to talk about asking questions with the goal of understanding more about the other person's point of view. I was excited to say yes to this because I grew up in a household where my first political memory is my father voting for President Carter and my mother voting for then Governor Reagan. And every 4 years subsequent to that, having conversations like the ones we're about to have here, but over the dinner table. And the reason I think this is important is when we care deeply about something, a policy issue or a political candidate, it's tempting to want it to be understood more than to understand. While the other person is talking, we're preparing a witty comeback so that we can win the argument. But what if we really won in such cases? We might succeed in bringing the other person up short, but we probably have not persuaded them. Now, I presume that if you've made the effort to attend this forum, you're not really looking to talk to others across difference in order to win in this sense. And yet it can still be hard not to lapse into behavior showing that we want to be understood more than we want to understand. In order to avoid doing so, we have to be intentional about our goals. If we really want to understand where someone else is coming from, we have to set aside our desire to be heard, at least for the time being. Our turns will come. Asking questions with the goal of understanding means that we are not asking rhetorical questions to score points or to maneuver the conversation in our preferred direction. Our only goal is to genuinely understand where the other person is coming from. Now, paradoxically, people who make this effort to genuinely understand and to ask questions that help us understand the other person are actually more successful in persuading others than if they had pursued that goal of persuasion directly, treating the interaction like a contest. When other people feel understood, they adopt a different, more open posture. And even if we do not persuade them, we can at least see where they are coming from on their own terms, rather than letting our own prejudices fill in the blanks. That in turn helps us to better understand ourselves, why we believe and commit to the things that we do. Moreover, it can lead to areas of potential compromise, as well as the ability to solve problems together in the future, even if we can't come to an agreement this time around. So instead of asking, how can you possibly prefer X to Y, or how could you think that way? Instead, which is natural, especially in the heat of the moment, we can ask, what are the most important political values to you? Or how do you see your life and the lives of people around you being affected by the election results? And many other sorts of questions and examples that we can do to reach out and really try to think from the other person's point of view. For example, can you think of any examples of things that we can agree on doing, even if we might not agree on why we should do them? So that's all I have for now. So Kate, please take it from there.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Kate Hallahan. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here. And I am going to talk just a little bit about distancing yourself when your self-esteem feels threatened. And I'm going to tell you a story about family, because I'm sure that many of you have family members who perhaps differ in their views from you. I know I sure did. And that was my dad, whom I love very much. And I remember one time he loved to talk about politics and he loved to watch the news and engage. And in his mind, I believe that he was engaging in friendly discussion. It wasn't always like that for me, though. And it was to put it bluntly, it was my dad's way or the highway when it came to those kinds of conversations. And when I got a little older and started coming home from college and had my own views and my own opinions and was developing my own values, sometimes it was really hard to listen to. And it was hard for me to separate between what was about me and what was about the conversation. And so after many tries, I developed some very quick little things that I could do to try to distance myself. And that includes verbal expressions of curiosity, like, oh, wow, okay, really? Tell me more about that. So those were some of my quick tactics in the moment to express that I was interested in what he had to say, even though I might not have agreed. But one night, he was particularly, what's the word I guess I want to call it? He was particularly excited about a political topic that he had seen on TV. And I was washing the dishes after dinner. And I was answering him and we were engaging, but then it got to the point where I felt that I couldn't have a voice. And so what I did was in the moment, I stopped and I thought to myself, be where you are right now, be in the moment. I felt the warm water on my hands and I got quiet and I realized he loves me. This isn't about me as a person. This is about a topic that we're discussing. And in that moment of silence, he asked, honey, what's the matter? In a very different tone of voice. And I said, Dad, I love you. And he said, I love you too. And we were able to go from there. So that's my story about, as I call it, detachment with grace. And that one time it worked for me. So with that, I'll turn it back to Julia.
Thank you, Kate. What a great start to today's conversation. Let's hear from 3 more campus leaders. Lena Tenney, formerly of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, now serving as the inaugural Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for the College of Pharmacy, will share a second perspective on how to distance yourself when your self-esteem is challenged. Then we will hear from Moritz Professor Katrina Lee about how to let someone know you have heard and understood them. Finally, in this group, OSU Newark Dean William McDonald will wrap up this second set of 3 concepts, discussing how to offer your own thoughts. Lena, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Another possibility in terms of distancing yourself if your self-esteem is challenged can come from your perspective in terms of your identities and your positionality in society. So I want to uplift some examples here. At the same time that all of these suggested tools are at our disposal and can be incredibly helpful and effective, I think we all know that sometimes the conversation can become harmful anyway. Hopefully that is not the case too frequently, but when that is the case, whether it's intentional or an unfortunate byproduct, those of us with marginalized identities are often expected to remain civil, even in the face of things such as dehumanization. We are expected to be silent rather than vocal about our pain, and we're certainly not generally permitted to depart the conversation for our own well-being. To be clear, no person has a duty to allow their humanity to be subjected to a debate, a thought exercise, or a devil advocate's position. You retain your humanity regardless of what is going on in the political world. And while civility is an incredibly useful tool for us all, it's still okay to set boundaries for your own preservation. So in other words, you're not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. So we all retain our humanity, regardless of policy position. And one of the things we can do is invite others to focus their arguments on policy rather than people when that slide begins to happen or from the get-go. So that can take a couple different forms, such as saying, I know we're engaging in some pretty difficult conversations. May I ask that even if or as things get heated, that we retain our focus on analyzing policies, not debating people's humanities. Including the use of dehumanizing language. So for example, when we're discussing immigration, I just ask that we not use the term illegal aliens. It's a pretty dehumanizing term, and instead let's talk about the policies that are really underlying the conversation here. For faculty in particular, when you're teaching, you have a wonderful opportunity to set clear expectations, including a potential syllabus statement about inclusivity in your classroom. I'm happy to send copies of that language to anyone who might like it, but that can include acknowledging that disagreement is going to happen and that is okay. And at the same time, what will not be permitted is the use of racist, sexist, ableist, etc. language. So if you do end up finding yourself in a conversation that has become harmful, triggering, or dehumanizing, or otherwise beyond your capacity, it doesn't have to be triggering in the psychological sense to be harmful to you. Here's a few other possibilities. One, you can simply state a boundary. I don't know, my therapist says this is a healthy thing to do. I'm trying it out. So you can say something like, this conversation is no longer productive, so I'm ending it, or I need to leave. On social media, since a lot of our interactions are virtual, something, if you share an article about the rise in anti-Asian racism that has happened during the coronavirus, and someone comments on it in a harmful way, you can say, you know, this post is really intended to be a supportive space for Asian and Asian American folks to talk about their experiences in this pandemic. So any comments that use racist language like Kung Flu are going to be deleted, though I am happy to talk about it further in a separate chat just between the two of us if you'd like to learn more about that. And finally, a recommendation as many folks enter what is considered to be their holiday season, depending on culture. Many folks have questions about how to engage with family, whether that's chosen family or blood family. Here's a way to set boundaries, particularly if you are anticipating strong disagreement at the dinner table. So if you've already made it clear what your position is, everyone knows, you can simply say, you know, we have this fight every holiday gathering, but especially here in 2020, clearly we're not changing each other's minds. I'm not going to agree to disagree because I think people's humanity is too important for that, but I will ask that we not have this fight right now and add whatever emotional appeal you need, such as in front of the kids or in my house, whatever might be useful to you, and instead suggest, can we just enjoy some family time together instead? So it really does come down to setting boundaries for your own well-being, and that's a form of self-care. And to wrap, I will remind you of the great Audre Lorde's articulation of self-care, which is that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And I think we all need to be doing some self-preservation in this moment. So I'll hand it on over to Katrina.
Thank you, Lena. Hi, everyone. I'm here to talk about a topic I discuss with my legal negotiation students, practicing empathy, slowing down to let the other person know, I hear you, and here's what I heard. This can be challenging. So for a moment, indulge me. Close your eyes, or not. Recall when you have been angry or happy. Angry, maybe because someone got a job you feel should have gone to someone else. Happy, maybe because your good friend won a local election. Now, consider how it feels to talk to someone about it. And then when the person speaks, you don't hear any acknowledgement of your emotion or what you just said. We've all been there. Now, what if the person you talk to acknowledges your feeling of anger or of happiness by telling you what they heard you say? That feels better, right? And you're probably more likely to keep talking with that person. And with that, you can all open your eyes. Now I'd like to share 3 lesson points moving off of that. First, you have to do the work to communicate. I hear you. Here's what I heard. That takes patience. It takes focus and time. There's no script. You have to work in that moment to listen and then communicate what you heard. Second, when you are stating what you heard the other person say, try doing that without judgment. When you say what you heard without judgment, you are allowing the other person to share. Think about sharing when you were in preschool or kindergarten. Those were literally shares, right? You'd bring in something like your favorite stuffed animal and you talk about it. On my slide here, you can see my daughter's favorites. They travel with us everywhere. My older one, that's her bear. My younger one, that's her giraffe. So you're in kindergarten and you share about what you love about your bear. Then another kid says, I see you love your bear. So the kid's listening, but it smells bad and it's not cute. How's that productive, right? It blows up the whole idea of a share. I think you'll find that you're not ceding ground. You're not giving up on being assertive. When you say what you heard without judgment, you allow sharing to happen. And my third and last point, when you're trying to state what you've heard, aim to get it right. Give them a chance to clarify. Ask them, did I get that right? Did I hear you correctly? Doing that can head off misunderstandings and stop you from going down a potentially toxic path. So practice. Practice in your everyday conversations. Try stating back what you heard. Try doing it accurately without judgment. You may not agree with the other person, but you may begin to feel more like your partners in a discussion. And I'd be happy and honored to practice with any of you. Salvia and Julia are my, I've worked with both of them as students at the law school, and they know I'm serious. So really, truly take me up on it. And reach out anytime and feel free to ask me questions, and also send me pictures of your stuffed animals. Thank you, everyone. On to OSU Newark Dean, Bill McDonald.
Thanks, and good evening, everybody. I have the pleasure of talking to you about the strategy of offering your own thoughts. And I'd like to tell you a story about a situation in which I didn't do that. I chose other strategies. In fact, I probably violated every strategy you've heard about tonight. And I'd like to tell you then about what I think I could have done by offering my own thoughts. So the situation was this: my brother had posted something on a meme on Facebook, and it was terrible. It was fictitious. It was racist. It was about Muslims, and I did a little research, and I was pretty sure just by reading it that it was totally false. And so I called him out on it. I just said I couldn't believe that you would post such a fictitious racist story. And the result a few months later was that he unfriended me. And that was after a little bit more of an exchange there. Since then, he's gone on actually to unfriend a couple of other family members, but that's really beside the point. The question is, how do you approach a situation like that or someone like that, especially if you want to preserve your relationship? I think that a great strategy is to offer your own thoughts as opposed to attacking theirs, which is exactly what I did. So I think that I could have responded with several statements. I could have said something to the effect of, I think that these parts of the meme are problematic or untrue, and here's why. I had done the research, and I just found that it was a story that went back some 6 years and had been posted in all sorts of countries and modified to fit them. I could have said, here's how I think I would feel if I were Muslim. Or I might say, this story doesn't fit with my experiences with Muslims. It may be a little bit counterintuitive, but I think that by talking about your own thoughts, you can help the person see that you're trying to find common ground. So, I could have shared that there was a time when I was fooled by a meme too, when a friend of mine posted that Woody Harrelson, a fake news story that Woody Harrelson had driven through Newark and experienced a automotive breakdown, and got great help from the people of Newark who came by to help him. It was totally false. And I shared that. I could have relayed, some common ground there. So it may seem a little counterintuitive, but that starting with your own thoughts might help somebody out and help you find common ground, but it can help them recover from a mistake. It can show them that you too have thought about the topic, that you have some experience with it, and that you want to be helpful to them in the end. So you avoid putting them on their heels. And if you've ever skied, you know that being on your heels is an uncomfortable position to be in, and you immediately try to correct and find your position again. So it's a great strategy. Highly recommend it. Salvia, it's back to you.
Thank you, Dean McDonald's. We will wrap up this segment of tonight's event with 3 more presentations. Mark Sullivan from Fisher Business School will discuss how to listen effectively. Then Jacqueline Mishamaya, Associate Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, will discuss the value of humanizing yourself. And finally, Stacy Rostauskas, our Vice President for Government Affairs, will highlight how to allow a conversation partner to save face. Professor Sullivan.
Thank you, Salvia. And I hope you're all, first, it's really exciting to be here tonight. And I hope you're getting some of what you need. I know I'm already learning from some of my colleagues here. So during the next 3 minutes, I'd like to talk about what's behind a conversation and how is that related to effective listening skills. So we know that when we move from casual conversation to crucial conversations, there's 3 things that are going on. We talk about this with my MBA students, that when stakes are high, when opinions vary, and when emotions are strong, we've moved from a casual conversation to a crucial conversation. And at that point, we've often moved also from, we moved to either silence or violence, metaphorically. So we either withdraw, deflect, or avoid, or in that crucial conversation, we might move to violence, where we assert our energy, we impose our will, or we may be abusive in pushing ourselves onto others. On a good day, with our better angels, we may create a pool of shared meaning. Now, this is not academic. You know what this is about. You just think about a good friend that you have. In your friend pool, you know that you can say anything you want to them without them either clamming up or blowing up. And that's because we have already shared our ideas, our hopes, our values, our aspirations. They know our heart, they know our head. But when we're with strangers and sharing differing positions with others, there is no pool. And with that, there's often some mischief or some challenge that happens between us. There's actually 3 levels of listening that we can consider as we engage in this ground where there's sometimes less than emotional social safety, where there is less than the spirit and the knowledge of what we're really about. Level 1 knowing is really shallow listening. This is when we half listen and we're very busy trying to come up with the ideas that we want to kind of control the narrative or to manage things, to win or to fix them so that they think like us. Now we know that level 1 listening is really about ourselves. And how does that feel? How do others feel when that's happening? Level 2 listening is really what I call reflected listening. And this is when we not only hear the words, but the meanings behind the words. And, with that, we may also consider that as we share that, reflect that back, that it's not to our level of satisfaction, it's to their level of satisfaction. So therefore, the focus is not on ourselves, it's on them. It's second person perspective that we're moving to. Okay. And finally, the level 3 listening, deep listening, is really about getting beyond words and meanings. And by the way, I'll tell you, this has nothing to do with our letting go of our positions. Okay, we can still have our interests and our positions there, but we are trying to engage and learn in a deeper way, as what some of my esteemed colleagues have already shared. And in this deeper level of listening, we're perhaps opening ourselves up to being influenced by, and perhaps even being vulnerable by discovering the pain that's behind their position, the excitement, the energy, the story of why they believe so much they do around their position. And so it's really asking more why questions than less what questions to do that kind of self-discovery. And in the process, we may not immediately change positions, but together we start to soften some of the relational boundaries, and we begin to know each other, and therefore we begin to hear each other in a very different way, and then begin a different kind of a conversation. So in sum, I would just share that, you know, if we can explore ways with how we listen, we can then show up perhaps in a different way and be known differently as we move forward. And I wish you well with that experiment. So now I have the privilege of introducing Jacqueline Meshelmia.
Thank you very much, Robert. So first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for being here this evening. And I'm going to talk with you briefly about humanizing oneself. And during this very polarized time, I think it's more important than ever is to bring in the whole subject of humanity and humanizing others along with yourself. And I think that one of the most important ways to do that is the use of I messaging or I statements. That's one of our trademark skills as social workers. And when you use I messaging or I statements, you know, it gives you an opportunity to express yourself, your feelings, your needs, your concerns, your worries. And also it gives you an opportunity to think about yourself and center yourself. And at the same time, it may help you to not jump on or attack the person you're talking with or trying to converse with. And so I think it's one important strategy on how to do that. And let me give you a personal example of how iMessaging saved me and a friendship. I'm going to be very transparent here. So 4 years ago, this week, by the way, I was at lunch with a very good friend of mine, a Black social worker. We were talking about all of these things that's going on in the world. And it came down to a subject about President Obama and President Trump. And I can see very quickly, based on her comments, who she voted for. And as she talked to me, I started to shrink in my chair. Then I had an out-of-body experience. I saw myself pouring my noodles over her head and making a grand entrance out of the restaurant. So I was frustrated with her and where she stood. But I thought, that's not the way to go. It's time to have a good conversation. So I got out of my out-of-body experience, pulled it together and said, oh, I need to understand why you feel that way. And she had very strong views about two groups of people who were marginalized in society. And what I said to her is, when you speak that way, I feel that you don't honor the woman's choice to make decisions about her body. I said, when you speak that way, I feel like you don't value the humanity of people who love people who look like them or the same identity as them. I said, when you speak that way, I feel hurt, I feel sad. And as a social worker, I feel like we should have a certain set of views. And I want to respect you where you're coming from because you said that religion is very important to you and your perspective is grounded in your faith. And I want to hear what you have to say about that. And I want to respect that. And I don't want to be angry with you. But let me just be very clear. I feel a certain way about the way you're talking today because what you're saying to me goes beyond your personal opinion because there is potential impact in what comes out of your statements that go into policies and practices. And so I take a moment to just take time to listen, to hear what she had to say. Now, let me assure you, by the end of the conversation, we didn't agree on it. I was still angry at her, but I just actually patted myself on the back because I took a moment to defend myself, say what I had to say, and most importantly, not attack a good friend. And I did that by using I statements and I messaging. My point to you is, it's important that we humanize what's going on around us and all people around us. That we can do this effectively, however, without attacking people who we disagree with, even if it's very, to you, more than politics, but you can still do it in an effective way by centering yourself with the whole use of I messaging and I words. I'm going to encourage you all to do that when it comes to heated conversations. Now I'm going to turn it over to Stacy.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Good evening. I'm Stacy Rostowskis. I'm the Vice President for Government Affairs here at Ohio State. And for more than 20 years, I have worked in politics, which I consider a blessing. It has given me the opportunity to hone my skills at helping others and often myself save face during challenging conversations. Throughout my career, I have engaged with public officials, ranging from Republicans to Democrats, liberals to conservatives, and even some moderates along the way. In my role at Ohio State, I've lobbied all of them to advance the university's agenda. This ranges from issues from increasing Pell Grant funding and federal research dollars, to preserving tax benefits for graduate students, to advancing capital funding for restorations of buildings here on campus, to improving lighting in the university district. These may sound like non-controversial issues to you, but when it comes to how to spend taxpayer dollars, trust me, they are not. One of my most memorable encounters is a day where I was on Capitol Hill lobbying on a big federal budget matter. In the same day, Republicans and Democrat members told me that they supported our request, but blamed the other party for lack of progress on the legislation. And then they proceeded to tell me that I needed to convince the other one of their perspective to move the bill. So these conversations can be tough, and many times they are not winnable, but it's my job to try. When it becomes obvious that the agreement will not be reached, I try interjecting a little bit of humor to diffuse the tension in the room. Literally just the other day, I was told by a public official that they appreciated our perspective, but they needed some time to reach philosophical agreement. I told them that we had a department of philosophers standing by, ready to help them get to their decision. So when things get politically heated, like in the example that I said above, where Republicans and Democrats were blaming each other for lack of progress, I try to wrap up the conversation by saying that the benefit of being the lobbyist for the Ohio State University is that my politics are not red or blue, they're scarlet and gray. This always gets a chuckle, but it's my gentle way of reminding people and myself that despite our differences, we're all Buckeyes. Of course, unless they're from that state up north. Helping others save face is really about preserving dignity for everyone involved in the conversation. In the words of our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, we should be too big to take offense, nor take offense if someone disagrees with our viewpoint. To me, this means that we should not strive to offend others, nor should we take offense if someone disagrees with our viewpoint. I hope you find some insight here in preserving the dignity of each other as we talk about challenging issues with families, friends, and colleagues, even if they are from that state up north. Thank you, and I'll turn it back to Sylvia. Or maybe it's Julia.
Thank you, Stacy. Wow, what a great set of presentations. I hope you've all discovered a few new tools to implement in your difficult conversations. Many of you might be thinking, wait a minute, they didn't hit all of the check marks on the handout. That's right, but you should feel free to discuss focusing on the future and keeping options fluid in your respective breakout groups. As we move you into your breakout groups, please know that we've stopped the recording. We might take notes, but we will not attribute our notes to any participant without permission. You should feel free to keep gathering your own good ideas as well for engaging in difficult conversations.
And from here, for the next 20 minutes, we're just going to recap a little bit of what our small group conversation looked like, talk about some of the challenges and opportunities, and try to commit to implementing some of these ideas in our next challenging post-election conversation. So I'd like you to feel free to liberally use the chat function, whether that you have questions, whether you have ideas or themes that arose. I'm going to start the conversation by chatting with Julia and Salvia just a little bit here this evening. And then hopefully we'll open up to everyone, and I'll try to call on the facilitators in this conversation, or the speakers earlier in the conversation as well. So Salvia and Julia, you were involved in these conversations, and I want to ask you, what were some of the biggest challenges to engaging in these difficult post-election conversations that your participants in your small groups mentioned? And what were some of the best ideas that were discussed for overcoming those hurdles and challenges? Salvia?
So one of the questions, one of the challenges was the other party may not be open to listen to what you have to say. And we had actually a lot of good strategies. One of the strategies is do not assume others' views at the outset. And sometimes you can start by saying, I think it's gonna be a difficult conversation, but I want to have it. So that gives the other person some comfort to start the conversation. Another one was to really take some time to yourself and not engage in a conversation where you are in an angry headspace, and setting some ground rules when you are having the conversation.
Yeah, well, these are all great ideas. Ground rules, being in a good space to have that conversation, not coming in with assumptions, and acknowledging challenges. Acknowledging a challenge might be a great way to frame the beginning of the conversation. Just to say, look, I know this is going to be difficult. Let's try to have a respectful conversation with one another. I know we may not agree. And acknowledging that on the front end may de-escalate in the long term for that conversation. Setting up ground rules is a great mediator's technique that I know that we've talked about in the mediation clinic, to build some momentum, to build some common ground, that everyone agrees to treating people with respect. Everyone agrees that particular terms or concepts might be off limit for the conversation, particularly those that are offensive or triggering in one way or another. But not coming in with assumptions. That's difficult to do. Making sure that we're present in the conversation. And as Professor Sullivan talked about, he mentioned that, look, the shallow listening where we're thinking of our next response, well, that's first level listening. We're just thinking about how we're going to react.
Yeah, that was actually another of our strategy, to try to really, really listen to the other person.
That's great.
And try to treat that person as a human.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's lovely. Making sure we treat them as a human, make sure we are trying to be present with them in the moment, and not thinking about what they might have said to you before the election, or maybe even 2 Thanksgivings ago or 4 Thanksgivings ago after the last presidential election, but being in the moment in the current space and making sure you're open to hearing what they have to say. And last was that cleansing, making sure you're comfortable in the conversation. Dean Hallahan said she was in that conversation with her father, and she just was at the sink. She took a few deep breaths. She got into a space where she was more comfortable with the conversation, and that tone shifted. And perhaps if we come in a good space, if we come in ready and comfortable to have that conversation, we can be more open to it. So I see a lot of chats in the chat function, but I want to turn to Julia really briefly. Julia, what are some of the challenges that stood out in your conversation, and what were some of the good ideas your group had to address them?
Well, one of the challenges that multiple people in my group sort of echoed off of each other is that just this election season has made a lot of us just really angry right now, or experiencing a wide variety of emotions like pain, maybe relief, eagerness, joy, all sorts of things, and sometimes all of them at once. And it's still not over. We still have a lot to be settled in relation to this election. There will be runoffs in Georgia, for example. There's just a lot that's still up in the air, and it's a very tense atmosphere. So reconciling also when you're in a difficult conversation and people claim that they have certain values, they claim to espouse certain values that you don't think match their behavior or things that they say. So that sort of attitude that you can feel coming into a conversation really makes that detachment with grace very difficult that was talked about in the intros. So, you know, it's one thing to say that we can do that or go to the balcony for a conversation. It's a lot harder to actually to have that play out in practice. And some strategies that our group talked about for dealing with those difficulties: restating what's going on in the conversation without judgment, using that deep listening, reframing what the other party has said so that it is based on their values and not you know, not an accusatory way of stating things. Also humanizing both ourselves and humanizing others, suggesting that we continue the conversation without using dehumanizing language or just accusation, statements of accusation. And not just someone mentioned also that detachment with grace doesn't have to just be showing grace towards others, but showing grace to ourselves as well, honoring our anger, honoring our emotions, and owning them in a non-judgmental way to ourselves as well, so that they don't take over our headspace and the conversation. So one way to do that as well that multiple people talked about is focusing on the things that you're hopeful for, rather than what you're still angry about or impatient about, or maybe feeling a little like smug about, a little satisfied. Focusing on the future instead of what's already happened and how people have behaved in the past.
Great. Well, those are great ways to overcome some of those challenges. One thought that I want to leave you with to connect a little bit back to some of what we heard earlier is simply just to reaffirm 2 points. One is to understand where we're coming from in these conversations. What's the place where we are entering them? Are we ready to have them? Are we still angry about what took place in the election? Are we so excited that we're going to gloat in a conversation? I don't think entering a conversation from those frames would be productive necessarily. Now, if we're entering with a person who is angry and we're there to listen, so we can let them vent, we can hear where they're coming from, we can acknowledge their emotion, their anger, that might be productive. Because we don't have, one question that resonated with me that many of the participants on this call asked in advance was, well, how do we have a conversation where we can change hearts and minds, where we can be productive, where we can take action, where we can take next steps? We may not be there right now. It might be too soon for that conversation. We might have lost ground. We might have lost trust and lost relationships with people who we once trusted, with people who we once had relationships with, people who live in the same dorm room or across the hall from where we do. And now might be the time just to enter a conversation so that we can listen for understanding. So we can just listen for the sake of listening, to be that teddy bear to wrap around the person who's frustrated with what's happening, so that we can build back some relationship. And those conversations that listen for understanding, that listen for the sake of listening to someone else so they can be heard, so they can vent, they often lead to more productive conversations in the future. And so getting something done, getting to agreement, accomplishing something might not happen this week. It might not happen at Thanksgiving or at the winter holidays, but hopefully down the road, by engaging in the deep listening, by having respectful conversations, we can get back on a path towards where we can build something towards the future. So I want to pause there. I want to check in with the facilitators and just ask really briefly, was there anything that stuck out to you in the conversations that you want to take 30 seconds to highlight in this conversation? Because we're at a small group, you should feel free to go on mute. I'm going to check the chat function for some questions, and hopefully one person, one of the facilitators, Mark, you came off mute first, and perhaps the second one will give a brief comment.
So Julia did such a great job summarizing, at least from my perspective, the group that I was in with Lena and with others. But I guess I would comment on tone. because on content, it was really very moving what all that was covered. But in terms of tone, I felt some heartfelt, genuine angst and hope at the same time. And that at the end of the day, this is tough stuff we're sledding through. And it's, I would kind of suggest it's in some ways discovery learning. We don't have a silver bullet on how to grow and to be as a national community in a healthy way, and how to cleanse ourselves when there's toxicness. But some of the really great ideas that Julia had suggested, I thought were very aspirational and inspirational. And so, will it change everything and anything between breakfast and lunch? No. But, to know that in terms of the tools that we have are a beginning and that we can move from there, it kind of helps me put my head on the pillow tonight. It says, there's hope. And I'll leave it there. But I just think it was a real privilege to hear, to listen, to experience, be part of this. And I just one final thing. I mentioned to the group that my very first election I voted in was with Richard Nixon and George McGovern. And I knocked on doors, hundreds of doors for George McGovern. And, 49 states voted for Nixon. And there was a lot of disappointment in the state that I grew up in, Massachusetts. And yet, you know what? We kind of got beyond that. And there was hope. So I'm hopeful that we can still try to get beyond this as Americans. And I'll just leave it at that.
Any other facilitators with a really short comment? I know we can't, I'd love to go to all of you. We just don't have time. All right, seeing none, that's perfectly okay.
I have one.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah.
I didn't see you. Go ahead.
And actually, I'm going to give credit to Nancy because she keeps the list handy to refer to, and I think makes a great point that these techniques are not natural to us. I will say maybe they come more natural to us lobbyists because we employ them on a regular basis, but even in my personal life, I don't think I use them. And so I think that that's a good, a good trick that I know I'm going to do and keep it handier as we go forward with these.
Well, that's perfect. And as we wrap up in the final few minutes here, there's one more thing I'm going to ask all of you to do. At the beginning of the session today, Salvia asked all of you to write down 1 or 2 ideas that resonated with you, ideas that you are going to use in future difficult conversations. What I'd like you to do right now is take 30 seconds, put it in the chat function, and write it down as your commitment to everyone on this conversation that you're going to use that technique. Maybe not today or tomorrow, maybe you use it at Thanksgiving, but you're going to test it out. You're going to see how it works. And you know what? Maybe it won't work. And that's okay, because the next time you use it, you're going to improve. You're going to learn from what went right and what went wrong. And you're going to do a little bit better. And you're going to be able to better engage in that difficult conversation. So I hope you've written that technique. Nicole, thanks. Don't set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Great. Thanks, Lena. Wonderful. Who else wants to make a commitment in the chat function? I'd love to see all of you write something in the chat function to leave this conversation today. I know that I've learned a ton. I was delighted to hear the conversation at the top of the hour. I know that there are some questions that we weren't able to answer. Many of you, there were some questions in the chat function that I noticed about social media. There was another about the checklist. I will send around the checklist to everyone who is registered for this conversation. I wish we had time to do another hour and a half on how to engage on social media in an appropriate way. But frankly, as Stacy just said, That might be another checklist, and we probably all need our own checklist for how and what to engage in on social media. My practice is to not to engage, but I don't know if that's the best way to go personally. But I'd urge you to just briefly ignore trolls and stay positive and not get caught in a cycle of negativity on social media. Some of those relatives on social media who disagree with what that you see their posts, as Dean McDonald said today, it might be difficult not to engage. But if you are going to engage, speak authentically, speak from your truth, and speak in a constructive way on social media. So I see a lot of folks, I need to continue I statements, respect diversity of preferences, ideas, and thoughts, listen more. Listen, listen, listen. As you leave here tonight, I hope you've taken some of these concepts with you. I'd urge you all to spend more time listening. There's a TED Talk out there by Bill Urey, who wrote Getting to Yes. And he says something along the lines of, we were created with 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So we should be listening at least 2/3 of the time and maybe speaking 1/3. So thank you all tonight from the Divided Community Project and President Johnson's office. We really appreciate your engagement in this second event in the Education for Citizenship post-election dialogue. Tonight, we've unpacked the presidential election a little bit and talked about how we might talk and engage in respectful dialogue. I'd appreciate it if you all have a digital or actual round of applause for our 9 speakers. And for our incredible student facilitators, Julia and Salvia, law students here at Moritz. I want to thank you all for your engagement tonight, and we will be sure to send out a link to the video, hopefully tomorrow, to everyone who participated, as well as the checklist to all participants as well. Thanks. Good luck in your difficult post-election conversations, and let us know how they've gone. We'd love to hear from you down the road. We'll see you all soon.